Hostile intent. Moon of blood. Let's get straight into that. During the last quarter of the 19th century, a rare breed of men and women sought their fortune throughout the American West. Some worked hard to achieve their dreams, others sought a quicker route using a gun. When they did this, good, God-fearing men and women authorized good but equally hard men to enforce civil obedience and laws passed by elected lawmakers. One such man was United States Deputy Marshal Morgan Dawson. Dawson, a native East Texan who had lost family in Red River County when renegades had rode into his family's farmyard and began shooting anyone moving. Now Dawson had been away at the time. Once he found out he was an orphan, he made a trip to Paris, Texas, in Lamar County, and applied for a job as a deputy marshal. He served the federal court out of East Texas well for over 10 years, and then he resigned his commission and decided to seek his future outside of East Texas. My name is Morgan Dawson. I used to be a United States Deputy Marshal. Now I'm just a drifter, seeking my fortune and a new beginning. All my life I had heard stories of forbidden areas, places where ghosts, goblins, and unspeakable horrors governed the land. And before renegades murdered my family, my father would sit beside his fireplace in our home and recount stories he'd been told as a child, and stories he'd heard as an adult. He would always close his tales with a warning that if we found ourselves in any of these areas, we should not try to travel through them, but use caution and detour around them. As a lawman, I often found myself following wanted felons into areas, which was spooky. Hell, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Nothing ever happened, but there had been a few times I heard strange sounds in the night, sounds which I couldn't identify. Sounds like small trees being smacked against larger trees, of men moaning far inside the forest, of wolves howling where there should be no wolves. A few times I found the remains of human beings which looked as if they'd been fed upon by some animal, which left no tracks, and if there were tracks, or they'd be distorted. Usually those I tracked through these areas gave themselves up when I caught up to them, and were eager to share their accounts of hairy men, less human than they appeared, or wolves that walked upright like a man, or of ghost lights. I never laughed, because there would be times when I caught movement out the corner of my eyes. I was happy to get them out of these areas and back to civilization. Now here I was, paused on the rim of a high hill overlooking a massive, old-growth forest with such a reputation. My horse didn't particularly like what I was asking him to do, and if he didn't like it, my pack mule damn sure didn't like it. I shocked my 44-40 Winchester lever-action rifle and put a round in the chamber. The cocking of the rifle seemed to calm the animals. I looked to the sky and didn't like what I was seeing. The night before, there had been a light powdering of snow. From the look of the sky, more was on its way. And I figured if it wasn't going to be a powdering, but a full-blown snowstorm. I rode cautiously, my rifle laying across the front of my saddle. And out the corner of my left eye, I caught movements, and so did my animals. I turned my head and I was sure I saw what might have been a huge wolf slinking through some underbrush. And I spoke soothing words to the animals and rode forward again. From my saddle and hidden among a group of cedars, I watched the man and the women gathering what supplies they could find, stuffing them into any bags that they could find. The man held a double-barreled shotgun. Occasionally, he checked the forest around him. I decided I liked some company in these woods, and I called out, "Hello, the camp. I'm friendly and riding in. Don't shoot." I nudged my horse and pack mule forward. I noticed the complete absence of any sound other than the sight sound of my animals. And the man was cautious of sorts. He held the shotgun in an offhand manner, but I was sure if he desired, well, he could blow me out of my saddle. The woman stood erect and looked me over. "I was hoping for a hot cup of coffee, but you folks appear to be moving out," I said in a friendly manner. "Mike, he's okay, I believe. Lower your gun," the woman said. "Who are you, stranger?" "Name's Dawson, Morgan Dawson." "Lawman?" "It used to be. Hung the badge up a few months ago." When the man lowered his shotgun, he smiled and walked up to my horse. He extended his hand and I shook it. "I'm Mike Crown. My wife. He gestured towards the woman, Janet. I tipped my hat and the woman smiled. I turned to Crown. You're pulling out? I was hoping this would be a good place to hold up for the night. Or two. Not a good idea, Dawson. We poured in a day before yesterday. 3 other families were already camped here. Sometime last night, they took our horse, my gun belt, and rifle, and nearly all of our supplies. They left us a bit of food and this shotgun with 2 loads. I climbed down off my horse and began rummaging through the saddlebags. I produced a shell belt and an old well-worn holster and a Colt 45. Well, that's not much, but strap this on. Is it yours? I took it off a fellow who tried to ambush me a year ago. It's yours now. I then produced a pair of woolen gloves and handed them to Janet Crown, and she thanked me and poured them onto her hands. Have you got any idea where we could find shelter? I have an uncle. He has a place on the northern edge of this damn forest. We were headed there when we joined this group. Well, Mrs. Crown, climb up on my horse. We'll lead the mule. Let's get to that uncle's place. Dawson, why are you doing this? Well, these woods are starting to get to me. I don't like it here. I think that there's safety in numbers. The old man pulled the doors of his barn closed. He checked to ensure the wind wouldn't open them. Satisfied, he looked skyward. He didn't like the way the clouds looked. He didn't like this time of year at all. Too many strange things happen around here during this time of year. Over the years, he lost all but a few head of cattle, and a large grey mule which was broke to the saddle, and a dozen or so laying hens, and an old dog which wandered onto the place several years earlier. The dog will let you know when the strangeness began, and when it was over. The house was solidly built to withstand a siege if needed. One wing of the house was used during this time of the year as a barn. The old man would ensure his stock's survival by bringing them into the house. Inside this wing, stables had been constructed. Hay was stored along with corn and oats. Firewood with a cook stove and a fireplace filled the second room, and the older wing had been converted into a meat locker after all the meat had been smoked. The old man was stocked up of any and everything that he needed. He stood near the front porch and for the fine drop of moisture on his face. Sleet, he thought to himself. He silently wished he had company to keep the long watch with him, to help pass the time of day and have someone to talk to after the darkness fell. And the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. I'd catch something hiding among the trees out of the corner of my eyes. I could tell the Crowns were probably seeing the same thing I was. I knew Mike Crown had his pistol I'd given him, and the shotgun. His wife, well, she had nothing, but her husband on one side of my horse and me on the other. Through the trees, I could see a modest-sized farmhouse barn and corral. I was sure hoping it was the Crown's uncle's place. I hadn't said anything, but I knew I'd heard a low, guttural growl as we came within sight of the house. The Crown looked across the horse and said, "My uncle's place. I see smoke coming out of the chimney." I simply nodded. We were within calling distance when the older man stepped out onto his front porch with a .30 caliber rifle in his hands, and he called out, "Who are you and what do you want?" Not the friendliest reception I ever had, but a careful man doesn't have to be friendly, especially in this neck of the woods. "Uncle Bill, it's me, your nephew Mike and my wife Janet." Who's the grim-looking galoot with your son?" "This here's Morgan Dawson. Well, he's a friend. Helped us out of a jam." The old man lowered his rifle and motioned for us to come closer. "Dawson, huh? Seems like I remember a fellow by the name of Dawson. Made a name for himself down in East Texas as a U.S. Deputy Marshal. Well, any relation?" "That would be me." Welcome." "Welcome. Too many times I've been told to get out. And I helped Mrs. Crown dismount off of my horse and asked if it'd be okay to put my horse, mule, and myself up for a few days in his barn." The old man frowned. "No, sir. Mike, put his animals up in a new wing." "The house?" I removed my hat and ran my hand through my hair. I knew some outlaws had brought their horses into buildings from time to time, but Well, this was the first time I'd ever been part of this kind of action. I know you're confused, Dawson, but strange things go on around here during certain times of the year. I'll explain later. You and your horse, mule and supplies will be safer inside. I didn't say anything, didn't question him or his actions. I just started towards the door my crown had opened and was leading my animals and property inside. The shots came from some distance away in the forest. My first reaction was to bring my rifle up to use, but the old man Crown placed his hand on the barrel and lowered it. Then I heard the howls. The late afternoon air was still, but the sounds carried. I looked to the old man, and Mike Crown had stepped out of the house and stood listening. I heard coyotes all of my life in East Texas, and yeah, every once in a while some lobo wolf would find its way into the area, prey on some sheep, goats, hogs, cattle, or anything it was hungry for. The howls hadn't been coyotes. I was unfamiliar with this forest, so I didn't know who might have had a camp or settlement inside hidden by the timber and rock formations. I just knew from the stories told by my own father and late other folks that these woods, they were haunted. They were to be avoided at all times. Not even the Indian tribes wanted any part of them. I did know the Crowns had set their camp with some folks and had gear, transportation, weapons, ammunition, and food taken during the night. Someone or a couple of someones had been shooting. Wolves had howled, and now all was quiet. Strange things indeed. 6 of the creatures had stalked the group, which left mine and Janet Crown alone and defenseless in the forest. There had been no hurry to stalk and feed off of them, so they had shadowed the larger group. The beta male had spied Morgan Dawson on the river and hung back. It had been the beta which Morgan had spotted out of the corner of his eye as he rode into the thick forest of fear. The beta's instinct had kicked in, and it had decided to retreat farther back into the trees and underbrush. When Dawson had found Mike and Janet, the beta was less than 10 yards from them, but again, its instincts warned him this newcomer was dangerous. He became even more dangerous when he outfitted the other man with more weapons. The female was given something which pleased her, and she rode the horse out of the abandoned campsite with the 2 males walking on either side of the horse. Now the alpha joined the beta and understood what was going on. He and the others would surround those moving deeper into the forest and would attack them when the beta would join them. Stealthy, the beta moved among the huge oak and elm and cedar pine trees. He no longer followed on all 4 limbs like a dog. No, he now moved upright with man-like legs. His front legs appeared more like human arms with fingers on the end of each paws, which looked more man-like with long, sharp claws. The beta was almost as large as the alpha. He stood shy of 8 feet tall upright. The alpha was easily 9 to 10 feet tall when moving upright. As the 2 men and the woman were about to enter the clearing where the old man lived, he uttered a low growl. The dangerous male must have heard it, for he looked around, and then they were in the farmyard. The alpha creature had been watching the men and the women preparing the camp. The pack was downwind from the animals, so their presence was far from these people's thoughts. And for some time, the food sources of the forest had disappeared. Now the only available source of food was their natural prey, man. These creatures had weapons which could inflict death, but few of these humans knew how to use the weapons they had with skill. Only one of the men seemed dangerous. He was the one giving orders. Soon, the alpha would give his unspoken command to attack. Ralph Davis had been a sergeant for the Yankee Army. He knew his business when it came to setting up a defensible perimeter. Counting the old man and his half-grown son, there were 7 of them. He regretted having left Mike and Janet Crown behind, and having taken most of their belongings, but survival was on his mind. He knew the dismal reputation of these woods. He had heard the howls in the night, and he had glimpsed movement among the trees. He had even found the mutilated remains of some unfortunate traveler while hunting for fresh meat one morning. He decided not to mention it to his companions. He knew there was strength in numbers, and he knew his companions well enough to know, had he mentioned what he had found, or there would have been a panic. Now he sat on a large piece of firewood, watching the woods, watching the animals for any sign of agitation or fear on their part. There, his mind nudged him. There, in a thick stand in pines, stood a tall Indian, and he approached the camp calmly. Davis challenged him, and the man stopped. "White man," he spoke softly, "you should leave this forest. There are creatures who come here during the cold, who will kill and devour you." Davis rubbed his chin and spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Who are you to be giving me advice? You seem to be untroubled by these creatures." "I am not what you see. I am brother to the wolf, to the forest giant, to those creatures that have no name. I am the spirit of the forest. I tell you again, you should leave, or you will be killed." And Davis was about to respond, but the Indian simply disappeared before his eyes. He rubbed his eyes, and there was no Indian nor any indication one had walked into the camp and had spoken to him. Then, as he rose to call everyone together, he heard a scream and a shout. Davis had survived the initial attack simply because, as soon as the massacre began, he managed to get to a horse and fled. The creatures were too busy ripping and tearing their victims apart to pursue one lone human or a horse, and so, for the time being, Davis was free. More importantly, he was alive. However, darkness would soon be upon him, and large flakes of snow were falling, making it impossible to really know where he was going. And Dawson walked around the house admiring the thought and the work which had gone into its design and construction. He had housed prisoners in jails which weren't as well designed and built. The farmhouse had been built in a clearing, and he estimated the house and yard, along with a hay meadow behind, to be at least 100 acres. A small, shallow stream ran through the middle of the property, and he approved of Bill Crown having had a large garden. He noted at least 2 water wells, one near the front porch and another near the barn. His natural inclination was to walk out to the barn, but old Mr. Crown had made sure everyone knew the barn, or it was off limits. He rolled himself a cigarette and lit it. The gunshots and the howling continued to bother him. Large snowflakes had begun to fall, and it made seeing anything next to impossible. But he did spy someone or something staggering through the trees towards the house. It was a man running for his life, if not for his immortal soul. And Dawson called out to the Crowns. Mike Crown and his uncle came to the door. Dawson pointed out to the man and started towards him. The man was looking over his shoulder, turned and shouted something to Dawson, which he didn't understand. What Dawson did understand was a huge wolf the size of a yearling calf rapidly pursued the man. The man collapsed at Dawson's feet, and Dawson raised his rifle and fired 3 times in rapid succession. He heard at least 2 of the bullets hitting the creature, spinning it around in its tracks. Mike Crown knelt down to help the man up, and upon seeing his face, let him fall back to the ground. Dawson looked at him. "This is one of the people who stole from us and left us with nothing. I'll be damned if I help this bastard. Crown, did you see the size of that wolf? What he and those others did wasn't right, but if you leave him here to die, well, you really might be damned. Now pick him up and get him inside." Howls erupted from inside the forest. They were coming and drawing closer. Davis sat quietly and sullenly at the kitchen table sipping a hot cup of coffee. The Crown family sat across the table and glared. Dawson stood by the front door and cleared his throat. "I believe we need to get this over with. Davis, do you deny you and 6 other people stole from the Crowns and left them to fend for themselves?" Davis mumbled something. Dawson walked over to the table and reached down, jerking the bugman up out of his chair. "I didn't understand you, mister. You owe me your life, and I suggest you start talking and apologizing to these good people." "You don't scare me, mister. I fought Apaches, Sioux, you name 'em. I fought 'em. It wasn't my idea to leave 'em, but I didn't stop the others. You saving my life, well, it was a coincidence, but yeah, I'm sorry on my part for leaving them and stealing any hope they had of getting out of this forest alive. Crown, I'm sorry. I know it don't change anything, but on my behalf, I apologize." "Where are the others?" asked Mr. Crown. "Dead. Ripped to shreds by those things out there. I'm pretty sure they're being eaten. We're probably next. I'm sorry, ma'am." Didn't mean to be so blunt. That's okay, Mr. Davis. This is a hard land. If a woman can't handle it, she doesn't need to be here, Janet Crown said. Bill Crown stepped into one of the storage rooms and returned with a Henry repeating rifle and a box of shells, and he handed them to Davis. You say you fought Indians and you'll help fight these monsters when they come for us? You don't fight or take orders, you don't eat. That's simple. I'll get you some blankets and you bed down by the fire, or inside Dawson's stall in the side room where the stock is. And considering your history with my family, you're getting a hell of a helping hand. Davis wiped his eyes. He was a hard man, but he'd owned up to his part in the theft and abandonment of Mike and Janet. Thank you, sir. I'll do my part. Janet Crown began preparing the evening meal. Old Bill went inside his cold room and cut 8 steaks from one of the sides of beef he had hanging. Dawson disappeared into the stable area and returned with 2 pies he'd purchased from a bakery back up the trail. He had them packed snugly into a box on a mule. And Janet smiled approvingly and asked if everyone would like a baked potato with the steak. Bill asked for biscuits and gravy to go with the meal. Mike began making more coffee. Ralph Davis had nothing to contribute to the meal. He was given 3 blankets and a feather pillow to use as bedding. He chose to make his bed inside the stable area of the house. He laid his rifle on the blanket he was using as a cover. On the hay, he raked it up. Dawson had taken his heavy coat off and had taken his spot near the front door. Mike and Bill Crown sat at the checkerboard and began playing. The aroma of beefsteaks cooking, potatoes and biscuits baking, and coffee brewing seemed to restore some calm in the house. Davis walked up to Dawson. You the same Dawson who used to work out of Northeast Texas? Yeah, worked for the United States Marshal Tom Carter of Judge Timothy Shaw's federal court. I heard a rumor that Carter was going to retire to his ranch in North Texas. He wanted you to take his appointment and you turned it down. Uh-huh. So, why didn't you take it? If you don't mind me asking. Got tired of trading violent men. Wanted to see what other opportunities were available. Oh, they say you're fast with that pistol. Any truth to that? Well, let's hope you never have to find out. Well, thanks for pulling my butt out the fire. That thing was almost upon me. No problem. Well, you didn't seem too surprised by size or speed. I wasn't. French-speaking folks in Canada call a wolf like that a loup-garou. Translation, werewolf. You think that he hurt it enough that it ran off and died? No. I didn't have the proper load in my rifle. The books I read about things like this say it takes silver to kill them. You have no silver bullets? You ask too many questions. Let's just get ready to eat. Nothing was left of the meal except for 1 pie which Janet refused to serve. It will be needed tomorrow night. What Dawson didn't mention was there was 4 more pies in his box. Another apple, a lemon, and 2 pecans. Janet cleared the table and Mike helped her wash and put away dishes and the skillets and baking pans. Bill Crown rose from the dinner table and moved to a comfortable chair near the fireplace. Davis retired to a seat on the couch and Mike and Janet sat at the table. Morgan joined Bill at the fireplace in a matching chair. Bill produced a pipe and filled it with tobacco and invited all to have a pipe, cigar, or cigarette if they wanted one. Morgan also produced a pipe and Mike rolled 2 cigarettes, offering Davis one. So, now we know what we're up against. Dawson nodded his head. Bill Crown just studied him for a moment and said, Dawson, where'd you ever get the idea that these were werewolves? Nobody really believes in that crap, do they? Well, some do. He sucked on his pipe stem and continued. I didn't until I was in the Arbuckle Mountains in south-central Oklahoma a few months ago. I ran into a deputy, United States Marshal, investigating a triple murder. Man, woman, and 6-year-old girl, torn to pieces. Bodies were fed upon and I helped bury them. And my first thought was a gang of sick renegades. I wished the deputy good luck and rode on. I found myself camped one night in the Kiamichi Mountains east of there. Folks I camped with that night, well, they were talking all kinds about haunts in these mountains. Talked about how Henry Clay Wallace and a few of his friends had killed some real monsters. The fellow I was sitting across the fire from said no one wanted to hear those goblin stories anymore, especially him. And I found out the next morning he was Henry Clay Wallace. And I had a long, enlightening conversation. I told him what I'd seen in the Arbuckles, and he told me to ride easy. And when we parted company, I found myself trying to avoid wild country. All along the way, I'd heard stories about wild men and wolves which walked like men. Some were stories I'd heard over 100 campfires, some as a youngster, and later as a young man from my father. Some from men I'd arrested and returned for a trial. But lately, I've been hearing more recent stories. He took a draw on his pipe. After this afternoon, well, I believe. When the room was quiet and I noticed Bill's old dog rise from his warm spot in front of the fireplace, tuck his tail and hide under the bed which had been prepared for Mike and Janet. Bill Crown rose from his chair and moved over to each lamp which was burning and turned them off. He didn't need to offer me any explanation. I moved to the door leading from outside into the room where the stock was and I waited. And the mules, my horse, and the cattle he held in this room, well, they seemed nervous. I spoke quietly to each animal, stroking their necks and trying to comfort them. And I remembered Henry Clay Wallace telling me about his friend Neil Wilson doing this when they were being stalked by some kind of abomination. I tried it and it worked some, but I guess I just didn't have the right words to impart calm over animals. Now throughout the night, the creatures howled and scratched on the doors with their long, sharp claws, trying to get at us. It was apparent that they knew about the doorknobs. They tried to twist and bang on the doors in an effort to get the doors to open. But Bill Crown had built and reinforced his doors and windows well. By 3 a.m, all we could hear was the wind and tree limbs heavy with ice cracking and crashing to the ground. Ralph Davis glanced at me, and after things quieted down, he commented dryly, "Do you have any silver bullets?" I ignored him, rolled up in my blankets, and tried to get some sleep. "Wake up, man of law." I heard a voice and opened my eyes and saw a tall Indian standing in front of my door, leading outside. My first thought was, my God, Davis opened the door. "Man of law, I am spirit of the forest. Hear me. There is no quarter given in this fight. The man-wolves will prevail. You, the old man, the female and her mate must leave. This one," he indicated Davis snoring away in his sleep, "cannot leave. He must join his companions in death. Heed my warning. I cannot save you." And then the Indian seemed to evaporate and disappear before my eyes. I pinched myself to see if I was awake and found I was wide awake. I saw no reason to wake Davis or the Crowns. To my knowledge, there was only one way in, and that was the trail I came in on, right through the heart of this godforsaken forest. If we were to make a break for it, I had to find an alternate route out. And that meant going out and looking. I was going to have to figure this one out. Henry Clay Wallace, Neil Wilson, and Charlie Nash had sought shelter among some large rocks which formed a shallow cave for their horses and supplies. They had managed to stretch a canvas over the rocks and build a small fire. But for several days following their chance meeting in the Kiamichis, Wallace had Morgan Dawson on his mind. He knew which direction he was riding, and he knew about the valley of the old growth forest which lay below them. He knew few had farmed or tried to farm there. All but one had abandoned their claims and left. Bill Crown had built and had stayed. And to Wallace's recollection, he was or had been the only human in the valley. They had just finished their own shelter when they heard the bark of a rifle 3 times. Wallace liked the quiet ways of the former lawman. He was sure he had fired the 3 shots. When and if the storm stopped, they would ride into the valley to see if Dawson was still alive and see if they could help him out. Well, Henry Clay's thoughts were simple. Once a lawman, always a lawman. It didn't matter if you continued to wear the badge or not. A good man retained his beliefs and his attitude. A bad man, well, you could spot them just about anywhere. Dawson had been an outstanding officer of the law. Fair, firm, consistent. "Still be ready in a bit. Charlie said we all need to eat." Wallace agreed. Henry Clay, he's okay. He measured up to possess a lot of good, old-fashioned common sense when he camped with us. I agree. I think he's alive. Not sure what he might have run into in there, but I hope he found Bill Crown and they rided out the storm together. I couldn't go back to sleep, so I just made myself comfortable and tried to think of a way out of the trouble I found myself in. I could saddle my horse and take my gear and ride away, or I could stay and fight. And for me, there was really only one choice. I heard someone moving around in the kitchen, so I pulled my boots on and got up. Janet Crown was adding fuel to the fire in the fireplace, and I cleared my throat, as I didn't want to startle her. Good morning, Morgan. Morning, Janet. Can I give you a hand with anything? She smiled. No, thank you. I got it all under control. I'll have coffee, ready soon. You look like you could use some. Yes, ma'am, I could. It was a long, cold night. You and Mr. Davis should sleep in here by the fireplace. I'll give it some thought, ma'am. She set about cooking a dozen eggs and baking biscuits, gravy, and frying bacon. I sat and ran the words my unexpected visitor from the previous night over and over in my mind. Mike Crown and his uncle both climbed out of bed and warmed themselves by the fire. Davis sat up in his bedroll and looked around. Mike Crown walked over to where he sat. How's it feel to wake up reasonably warm with a full belly, Mr. Davis? Davis simply hung his head and said nothing. I filled a cup with coffee and took it over to him. He accepted it and thanked me. I was about to walk away and he stopped me. Hey, Dawson, why, we prepared for them, weren't you? You fired 3 shots and 2 of them found their mark, didn't they? You were firing silver bullets, weren't you? There's a small town back up the trail I came down. I stayed there a week. Heard a lot of stories about this place. I had several people suggest I invest in some silver bullets, and so I did. Then you hit that creature twice with silver bullets? Yes. Well, then if the legends are true, you thinned the pack down. Maybe, maybe not. At least there's one of them mighty uncomfortable this morning. The pack kept watch over the house. No one had come outside. The mission during the night was simple: to frighten the people inside. The alpha male had conceived a plan about how to get inside, but to do so, 2 members of the pack would be forced to shed their powerful wolfen form for the human form. Once they pretended to be survivors of an attack, they would be admitted into the house. The alpha would lead the attack, and throughout the attack on the house, they'd change back into their wolfen forms and attack from within. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Moving very slowly down from the rim, Henry Clay Wallace led his 2 comrades. All 3 had their rifles laid across the front of their saddles. Wallace, like Dawson, had been raised on stories of forest land, which it just didn't feel right. Although they weren't personal friends, Wallace liked Dawson and didn't want to see him injured or killed. They came to the edge of the forest, and their mounts and their pack horse fought to keep from going inside the tree line. Hank, these animals smell something. Maybe we should skirt the edge. Wallace agreed. If Dawson was in these woods, he was probably trying to stay just within the tree line. The forest, it was still, but it seemed to Wallace that deeper in the trees, there was a murmur of voices. A chuckle, or a quiet laugh. He reined his horse up and climbed off. Neil Wilson had a troubled look upon his face, but he followed his partner off his mount. Charlie, Wallace whispered, back off a bit and keep our horses. Don't get close to this tree line. You understand me, son? Charlie Nash knew Wallace was trying to protect him, but he acknowledged and he understood. As Charlie led the other 2 horses away from the outside edge of the forest, Wallace and Wilson crept slowly and silently into the forest. Wallace knew to keep the wind blowing in their faces, and to stop and listen. And soon they heard voices, much clearer now, coming from the clearing. Wallace and Wilson stopped all movements and listened. A rough voice was speaking about how the people in the farmhouse would be deceived by simply having 2 of their number seek sanctuary, while the remainder of the pack pretended to stalk them. Wallace motioned Wilson to fall back. They reached the edge of the forest and remounted their horses. They stayed far back from the edge of the forest and quickened their pace. They began hearing the howls of wolves. They came within sight of the well-built farmhouse. From their vantage point, they saw two men running rapidly throughout the forest, heading towards the house and screaming for help. The door opened. Wallace made out that it was Dawson and another older man standing on the porch. Both men were waiting for the wolves to burst out of the trees, but this failed to happen. Instead, two men emerged from the forest, acting terrified. Wallace raised his rifle and in quick succession fired 4 shots. And Dawson looked up to see the two men he'd been about to help begin changing shape and form before his startled eyes. Dawson and the older man began cutting loose, and the two wolfmen pitched forward into the snow and ice, dying. Wallace and his men moved up to Dawson. Dawson extended his gloved hand and told Wallace and the men to load their rifles with his shells. Ralph Davis opened a door leading to the stable room inside the house for Charlie Nash and to get them inside. And the wind whistled through the forest. Janet Crown remarked it sounded like the gates of hell had been opened. Morgan Dawson and Henry Clay Wallace under the same roof talking and began comparing notes. Davis had butted up to Charlie Nash and asked if Wallace was really as fast as some had said. And Charlie admitted he'd never seen Wallace in action. Wilson, who was nursing a hot cup of coffee, commented he'd seen Wallace in action. You prayed you never had to look in those blue eyes. Mike Crown, well, he listened quietly. I was amazed by what Wallace told me. These creatures could shed their wolfen bodies, but a few refused to do so. They could talk, plan, blend in. Their plan would have worked had Wallace and Wilson not been there. Dawson knew he owed these men. The house was now full. 7 men and 1 woman. Dawson could get some rest now, and he knew Wallace had some experience dealing with creatures which shouldn't exist, but did. Mike Crown and his wife made sure everyone had a hot meal and a hot coffee. Bill Crown made sure the fire in the fireplace continued to generate heat. Wallace and Wilson kept watch. Davis, along with Nash, looked after the animals sharing a part of the house. And occasionally there would be a loud crack and a crashing sound. They all knew this was simply large tree limbs bearing more ice than they could support, breaking and crashing to the ground. Mike Crown brought coffee over to Wallace and refilled his cup. He made a gesture towards Dawson sleeping. You know much about him. I know he doesn't like these woods or werewolves. He smiled and Mike laughed. Well, that's an understatement. You killed those 2 early this afternoon in pretty short order. He's a good man to have on your side when the chips are stacked against you. He pulled me and Janet out of a tight spot 2 days ago. Gave me a pistol, holster, and shells. Put my wife on his horse and walked out of the woods. Me on one side of the horse and him on the other. He shot another one of those monsters yesterday afternoon. Like I said, he don't like werewolves. I was pretty sure I hadn't long slept, but it hadn't been a peaceful slumber. I suppose he appeared to me in my dreams this time, the spirit of the forest. He looked older this time, tired. He told me I had waited too long to leave. The wolf creatures would never allow any of us to leave now. The spirit told me 3 of the 7 which lived in this valley were now dead by my hand, and the alpha male had sent word out that the pack needed help, and they were receiving it. It was midnight by my pocket watch when the creatures began trying to get through the heavy wooden doors and our defenses. The wind was howling through the trees and mingling with the howling of the wolf creatures. I'd learned enough about them in the past few days to know that they were shapeshifters, shifting from wolf to man and back to wolf. At one point, when the wind was calm, all we could hear was growling. I stood at one of the doors and said loud enough for any creature standing or squatting on the outside of the door, "I'd like to talk to you, Chief." There was a few minutes of silence, and I figured they were up to something. Then there was a knock at the door. "My name is Charles. I am the alpha male, the pack's chief, if you will. Someone wished to speak to me?" "I did. My name's Morgan Dawson." I know of you, lawman. Speak." "We want peace. You destroyed one small party in these woods. Now you're trying to destroy us." "It is our nature, Dawson. Well, it's not in my nature to allow anyone or anything an opportunity to kill me, or those under my protection. Nor is it mine. Then it appears we've reached an impasse. Dawson, why are 8 of you? Send out half of your forces, and those of you who will remain will be allowed to leave the forest and tell your people what happened. And I could feel eyes all on me. Surely no one expected me to agree to such a horrific agreement. I glanced around the room and smiled. Henry Clay Wallace was ejecting the shells out of his rifle and reloaded with my silver bullets. Mike Crown was loading his .45 with him, as was Neil Wilson and Johnny Nash. Only Davis, Bill Crown, and Janet Crown were using lead. Dawson, have you made a decision? Death for half, or death for all? Charles, come daylight, the 8 of us will square off with you and your best shapeshifters. We stop you and yours, and we all live. If we can't, well, we'll have a story to pass on to your cubs. Fang and claw against 8 unimportant humans? I heard him chuckle. He knew the nature of the beast which was challenging him. We understood the nature of these putrid, bloodthirsty creatures. Okay, Dawson. Shall we say high noon in the yard in front of the barn? No tricks? No tricks. And silence again, and then a mighty howl coming from just beyond the door. Mr. Davis didn't think much of the plan. There were enough horses and mules which we could use to ride out on, yet he could think of nothing but staying put until spring. I joined Bill and Mike Crown by the fire and spoke to them in hushed tones. I trusted Wallace and had already told him what I thought our chances were. He agreed and joined his 2 friends at the kitchen table for a hot meal. And I had a crazy idea, but I knew a few things about human nature which would probably apply to these creatures. After all, they were human once in a while. Old Bill Crown came out of his supply room and nodded towards me and winked at Mike. Mike walked over to the table and sat down sipping his coffee. You think this crazy idea will work, Morg? Oh, I think it's got a better than 50-50 chance. We saddle the horses and mules, bring them out with us. They simply assume we're being overconfident. They'll square off with us. Some of the less experienced creatures will get really greedy and break for us, and then for the animals. That's when we cut them down. I'll use my spare pistol, lead bullets. Won't hurt them, of course, but might make them really overconfident. Wallace and Wilson will cover our flanks with their rifles. You, Davis, Janet, and your uncle will pour lead into every living monster. What will you do? What will Morgan Dawson be doing? Advancing towards Charles and killing as many as I can with my rifle. And when it's empty, I'll use my peacemaker. You'll be using silver bullets? Yes. What happens if, for some reason, you go down? Well, then Wallace will get you all mounted and make a break for it. I knew it sounded like a plan out of hell, but Mike knew I had every intention of winning. I slept peacefully that night. The creatures had withdrawn. The clouds began to part and the moon was big, bright and full. I prayed that night before I turned in, praying for a miracle. When no one was hungry the next morning, I broke out another pie which everybody ate with their coffee. Towards noon, everyone checked their weapons and began putting their winter coats on. I didn't let everyone know that I had an ace up my sleeve. And the horses and mules were saddled, and we led them out. The wolves were on their back legs, and I spotted a rather large creature in the center of the line they had made in front of the barn. I spoke quietly to everyone and left Bill Crown for last. Bill, I whispered. The loft door was wide open. Could the wind have? No, son, it couldn't. It's just like you had it figured. I turned towards the ravenous creatures. Drool ran freely from their jaws. Several had made an attempt to break ranks and attack, and Charles, even in war form, possessed the ability to speak. His voice was rough and raspy, but I recognized it.
Confidence, Dawson. I like that. Do you wish to start the ball rolling?
I reached inside my coat pocket and produced a cigar. Wallace was smoking one, also. Well, why don't you start, Charles? A few of your cubs are chomping at the bit.
Very well.
He beat his chest 6 times. When it was a low ground, all but Charles attacked. I fired my pistol, striking one of the creatures 6 times. They spun the beast around, and I tossed the empty pistol on the ground. I began using my rifle. Silver bullets began striking the beasts and dropping them. The Alpha saw what was happening. The humans were using silver bullets. They were advancing. He raised his large head up and howled. He was answered by 2 shots from my .45. 3 other shots fired from the Peacemaker struck him squarely in the heart. Werewolves began jumping out of the hayloft door. Wilson, Nash, and Mike Crown were killing them as fast as they hit the ground. I reached behind my back and produced a stick of dynamite, lit the fuse with my cigar, and launched it into the open door of the hayloft. Henry Clay Wallace also lit the fuse of a second stick, and it too found its mark. The explosion and fire, it was intense. Wolves howling and mingled with the human screams assailed our ears. We stayed until the fire was smoldering, mounted our horses and mules, and made our way back the way Wallace and company had first come. As we topped the rim and out of the forest, I turned to Bill Crown and his family. You going back, old man, to rebuild? Well, maybe. The kids will go back with me. How about you, Deputy? You going back? No. I think I'm going to ride along with Henry Clay for a while. He leads an awfully interesting life. I shook hands with the old man and told Janet to take care of the old man and her husband. Shook hands with Mike and tipped my hat and rode after Wallace, who had extended his goodbyes on the trail. When I was a youngster, sitting at the feet of my father, I didn't know if monsters and bad forests really existed. Now, I know.